I posted a video earlier where I mentioned that for this Christmas I'm building a set of cutting boards as Christmas presents to my family. On the first video I show how I built the guitar-shaped board. You can find the link to that at the end of this video. On this video I show how I built 4 standard cutting boards that I built at the same time. I'm using pretty much the same wood species and the same design than with the guitar-shaped one, which made my process a lot simpler. I'm using walnut, ash and purple heart for these boards, and the final thickness will be around 4 centimeters or 1.6 inches. Like pretty much everything I do, also this process starts by getting the material milled so that it's straight, square and at the thickness I want it to be. I personally like building cutting boards, as you can be pretty creative with them. They are also great for beginners, and these 4 that I'm building here are fairly easy to build by anyone with basic tools and knowledge. The first ones I built earlier using this design I did without the big jointer I'm using here, so you don't need to have all the fancy tools for this kind of build. Naturally they make life a bit easier, but as mentioned, these would be great beginner projects for anyone. What I'm doing here is getting 2 edges straight and square against each other, and just to keep track I mark the ones I've processed so that I know which way to put these through to my planer, which is the next step on this build. With my planer I get the wood to the final thickness, and then I can finish the milling process with my table saw. This whole process only takes 30 minutes or so for these 4 cutting boards that I'm building, in less than 1 hour it's already time to start gluing it up. So with the jointed edge running against my table saw fence, I cut the other side so that everything will be nice and square when I move over to the glue up. It really pays off to do the milling process as carefully as possible, then you won't run into any issues with having seams in your glue lines or other problems that I've faced when I haven't done good job with getting everything square. As I'm building 4 cutting boards, obviously there were 4 different glue ups I needed to do. I start now to understand the joke about how many clamps does a woodworker need. Just 1 more. I almost ran out of clamps on this one. So let's see which one wins. After letting them dry for 1 day, it was time to move over to my drum sander, and I think this is where a drum sander really shines, especially now that I had 4 cutting boards and the guitar shaped one done at the same time. To process this really saved a lot of time. Again, this is not something you need, but it is sure nice to have one. I'm using 80 grit sandpaper on my drum sander, and it leaves a really nice and smooth surface. I could probably start hand sanding at 120 grit right after this, but just to be sure that the sanding and finishing is very consistent, I still resand with 80 grit once I am at that stage. But there are a few steps before I'll start the sanding process. First, I need to make the board square, and I'm just using my miter gauge on my table saw to make the other side straight and square to the edges. And then use my table saw fence as a reference to do the same thing for the other side. A crosscut sled would be an excellent choice for this, but I haven't yet built one for my new table saw, so this did the trick for now. And now time for some interesting sounds when you hear 4 overlapping router videos creating a roundover to my boards. Sorry about that. It will be interesting to check the video statistics afterwards and see how many people dropped out from the video listening to that sound. I was going back and forth on if I want to create handles to these boards or should I just run a 45-degree chamfer on the sides to make it easy to pick it up. In the end I decided to use a traditional slot that's quite easy to do with one router bit. I set up the stop blocks to my router table and added the front support as well to make sure that things will stay in place when I created the slot. I guess it would be a smart option not to create the whole slot in full depth at once, but take a bit of material off, then lift the router and run it again and so on. Because the way I did it actually caused some burning and you can actually see smoke coming out, so I do recommend being smarter than I am with this part. Now it's finally time to start sanding, and as I mentioned earlier, even though I already sanded these with 80 grit on my drum sander, I started hand sanding with 80 grit again. Then I went up to 120, then 180 and final sanding with 240 grit. I think that's a good place to stop with cutting boards, at least it works for me. It is important to introduce some moisture to your workpiece before you do the final sanding. In my case, after I had sanded with 180 grit, I sprayed water on the boards to lift the grain. This will ensure that when you finish and start using the board, the surface will stay nice and smooth. Skipping this part will make the boards very unpleasant to use. I'm sure it depends on the conditions, but the drying process takes probably around 30 to 45 minutes. While they were drying, I was cleaning my shop, which seems to be a constant battle I have, how to keep the shop clean, safe and organized. So here's a nice little time lapse, seeing how they dry and seeing me doing all kinds of stuff in the background. Now with somewhat cleaner shop, the boards were dry and ready for final sanding, which is 240 grit. There was a bit of water left on the assembly table, but I just sanded them out. It wasn't that much anyway. For finish I'm using a mixture that I do myself, which is basically just mineral oil mixed with beeswax. I know that many people like to sink their cutting boards to a bucket full of mineral oil, but personally, especially for non-end grain boards, I really don't see the point. It does make for a cool video, but in reality, just rubbing this stuff in gives a good finish and it's a very quick operation because basically you can wipe off the excess in just few minutes and be done with it. with that, I'm done with the build. I hope you liked the video, and please subscribe and leave a comment. It is now 22nd of December and I still have 2 boards to finish, but those are for myself, so it's not that critical to get them done before Christmas. Catch you on the next one.